everyone, Kelly here, and today I want to share with you my most recent reads. And last week I posted a recent reads video that was specifically just new releases that I have read in the last couple months that I really love. So if you missed that video and you want to hear me talk about some newer books that got 4 or 5 stars, I'll link that down below. So today I'm just going to talk about the other books that I have read kind of in the last month. So I've got about 8 books to talk about, and unfortunately a lot of these are 3-star books. So I'm going to talk about the 3-star books kind of in like order of the way I like them, because I think that 3 stars is such a broad category. So many of these could have been like 3.5 stars, like we're so close to being 4 stars or whatever, but I'm not doing half stars this year, so they all fall into the same category, but I have very different feelings about them. So that's why I kind of try to put them in the order in which I like them, so you would know which one were more higher 3 stars and which were lower 3 stars. So the first few books I'm going to talk about were all books that I read as part of the readathon that I was helping to co-host in August called Middle Grade Magic. And I had planned to read a ton of middle grade during that time, but then I was also planning homeschool for my daughter. So I ended up only finishing 4 books over those 2 weeks. And I gave 3 stars to 3 of the 4, and not very high 3 stars, like low 3 stars. So yeah, it just didn't turn out to be a great readathon for me personally, but oh well, that's how it goes. And the first one I want to talk about, the one I liked the least, was called Malin and the White Reindeer by Ingrid Zellner. And I read this for the prompt about reading like a folk tale or a fairy tale. And this book was written about, like, based off of some Swedish folk tales. It says on here, using the legends and traditions of the Sami people of northern Scandinavia. And this is basically about this girl, Malin, who she goes out, in the beginning it's winter, and she goes out to walk out in the snow and meets a white reindeer. And her grandmother has just passed away, and her grandmother always told her that if you see a white reindeer, that they will talk to you and tell you things about the world. And so she develops this friendship with this talking white reindeer. And this book basically follows a year in Malin's life, and in every season the reindeer comes and kind of tells her a new story about the history of her people. And yeah, I just didn't really like this book. I feel bad because this was a gift given to me by my brother-in-law, who went to Sweden and bought this book there. And I was just expecting more from it, like it to be more of a folktale kind of story, but it actually is more just like philosophy for children is how I would describe this. It just wasn't that interesting. Like, there's no plot. It's basically them just having a conversation about like the ancestors or about the seasons or whatever, and I just don't know how much that would like pull a child into the story. So gave it 3 stars and a low 3 stars. So the next 2 I read were both audiobooks, so I don't have them physically. The next one was Clean Getaway by Nick Stone. And this one was a real disappointment to me because I'd heard wonderful reviews of this book from other booktubers, and I was really excited to read it. And then I barely finished it. Like, I almost DNF'd this book several times, but it's pretty short. Like, I think the audiobook was 5 hours or less. And so I thought, okay, I can push through. And I just didn't really like it. And so this is a story about a boy named Scoob, and at the very beginning his grandmother comes and like basically picks him up from home to take him on a road trip. And they end up like going on a road trip through the South in a Winnebago, like a camper van. And as the story goes on, we kind of see that there might be like the grandmother might have a secret reason for taking Scoob on this road trip, and it relates to her past, and some weird things are happening with his grandmother and stuff like that. And so at the beginning you don't really know what's going on. And I just kind of was really bored with this book. Like, and I am not someone that loves middle grade contemporary, so I thought maybe it was just me. So I ended up talking to one of my friends who also was reading it for middle grade magic, and she said she also didn't like it. So we both were on the same page, and she reads a lot of middle grade contemporary. So I'm like, okay, it's not just me. It's not just because I prefer fantasy for middle grade. Like, I'm not the only one that doesn't like this book. I just didn't think that it had much of a plot. Like the transitions were really quick. Like we'd be in a scene when I was actually like getting invested with what they were doing on their road trip or their relationship between Scoob and his grandma. And then it would be like, suddenly it's the next day or 3 weeks later or whatever. Like the transitions were really fast and got me confused. Sometimes I actually like stopped the audiobook, rewound, and listened again, thinking that I had like somehow skipped a part. But no, it was just like really weird transitions. And then I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not gonna like go into details, but there is a lot of stuff about his grandma that just didn't do well for me. Like I didn't like the way her storyline ended up and kind of some of the things she was doing. And then I felt like he and his father were having a lot of tension in their relationship, and I didn't feel like the conclusion of that was great. Like I just felt like the whole ending happened so quickly. That was one of the times I rewound that I thought it was like suddenly several weeks later and I'm like, oh, everything's like done, and it just didn't feel like much of a conclusion. So in general, I didn't really enjoy this book, and I probably should have DNF'd it because I feel bad giving it a low rating. But I will say, even though I didn't enjoy this, I did appreciate the conversations she was having, and I think I know why she wrote this book and like her purposes, and I think those were good. Like I think a lot of the point of it was to teach, because it's for kids, that is to teach kids about the Green Book and about racism in Southern America during the 1960s, because his grandmother is talking about some of the times from when she was younger, like her and the grandfather were younger, and trying to travel in the South with him being a black man and her being a white woman, married in the 1960s. So I appreciate those conversations, and I appreciate what she was talking about and sharing that information with a younger audience currently. I just didn't think the execution of the plot was good, in my opinion. And then the next audiobook I listened to that I also didn't really enjoy and was disappointed in was The One and Only Bob by Katherine Applegate. And I also gave this a low 3 stars. And I feel really bad because The One and Only Ivan is one of my favorite middle grade books. I love it, and I was really excited about the sequel, but I was apprehensive because I didn't think it needed a sequel. Like I think The One and Only Ivan is perfectly fine as a standalone. And the movie is out now on Disney Plus if you want to watch it. I haven't seen it yet. I think my husband and I are gonna watch it together to see if it's okay for the kids to watch. But I'm really excited about that in the movie. And the one cool thing about this audiobook is that in the movie, Danny DeVito plays the voice of Bob in the movie, and they had him narrate the book since it's from Bob's point of view. And that was a great choice. That was probably the only thing that kept me going and able to finish this book, even though it was only 3 hours long, because it was just boring and really didn't need to exist. So basically this is just the story of Bob, who is a stray dog. He's Ivan's best friend in the first book. This takes place after the first book. So it's not gonna spoil you or anything because it's just following a stray dog. So he's just kind of wandering around. And then like towards the beginning, we find out that there's a hurricane coming to the area. And it's basically just Bob surviving during a hurricane with like trying to help his friends as well. And that's the whole plot. And it just didn't feel necessary. It didn't add anything to the story. Like seeing a hurricane from a dog's point of view, at least the way it was written, was not interesting to me. Really the only thing that kept me going was Danny DeVito's voice. But otherwise, I probably, if I just read this physically, I would have given it a 2. I just didn't think it was that good. There were a couple funny parts, seeing that Bob is kind of like a scrappy dog, so I probably would have given it a 2 if it wasn't for the audiobook. It wouldn't have been like so horrible to be a 1, but yeah. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go out and read this book unless you're really like invested in finding out what happens to a dog in a hurricane. And then continuing the audiobook trend, my next 3-star read was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and I listened to this thriller, and I was really looking forward to this because it's like everybody's talking about it lately and how fun it is and all that stuff, and I just didn't really like it. And I think it was just a me thing. It just wasn't for me. I just didn't find it that entertaining. I've liked all the other Riley Sager books that I have read, so I was expecting more from this one. But it kind of felt like if you have read Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, it feels like a very similar story, but I felt like Turn of the Key had a lot more suspense and atmosphere. And so comparing the two, this one was a real disappointment. So basically it's just about this woman who's, her whole life, people kind of like known who her family was, because when she was young, her and her family left this house. I can't remember what the house is called, but they left behind this house because it was haunted and they were like basically chased out by ghosts or whatever. And her father wrote this like really popular book about their experience in this home. Like they were only living in it for like, I think 3 weeks, and like all about their time in there and why they had to leave and like the paranormal stuff happening and all that stuff. And her whole life, she has been like, I know that's a lie. Like, I don't think there were ghosts. I don't know why we left. Why did my father lie? Why has he always been lying to me? And then her father dies and she inherits the house. And so now she's an adult and she has to go back to the house to fix it up in order to sell it. And she also just kind of wants to find out why they left, because she doesn't believe there were ghosts. And so I think the book is supposed to be kind of like a spooky, creepy, because, you know, things are happening in the house and it's supposed to be kind of atmospheric or whatever. And I just didn't care. Like the whole time, I didn't think that things were very spooky. And I'm a wimp. Like, I expected to be spooked out or creeped out by this book, and nothing scared me at all. I didn't find any of it interesting or atmospheric or anything. So yeah, I just didn't like it. And then the next one I read was Slay by Brittney Morris. And I'm really disappointed that I gave this one 3 stars, and I almost gave it 4. So this is actually a high 3. This is like my favorite of the 3-star reads. And if I was giving half stars, this definitely would have gotten a 3.5 star. And it probably deserves a 4, but I also base my star ratings off of enjoyment. And I just didn't enjoy this book as much as a 4-star book. So what this is about a girl named Kira, who, I think that's her name, and she has designed this whole game, and and I'm not a gamer, so like, what is it? It's like a multiplayer online role-playing game, is that what they're called? And so she's created this large role-playing game, and it's only for Black people. And it's kind of just to create a safe space, because she has played other games, other RPG games in the past with her friends, and, you know, has been called the N-word and like just called bad things, and she feels like Black gamers should have a safe space that they can play together. So she's created this game, and, you know, she's living her life, like being happy, having her game and all that stuff, except for she doesn't share it with anybody because her family doesn't know that she plays video games and all that stuff. So she hasn't told anybody that she's the creator of this game. And then a murder happens in real life, and the game called Slay is blamed for the murder of this Black boy in the United States. And so then all this stuff comes out about the video game, and everybody wants to know who the creator is and wants them to speak up for the game or whatever, because of this murder of this Black boy. And Kira, you know, she's a 16-year-old girl, and she doesn't know what to do, how to defend her game and all that stuff. So there's a lot of discussion in here, and I really appreciated all the discussions about race and everything that was in this book. Like, I think there were some great discussions about, you know, video games and having a safe space where when you're online and people can say whatever they want to say and there's no ramifications, you know, having a safe space for someone, you know, that is a valid request to not have to go into a game and be called racial slurs. And so I enjoyed all the discussion around that. I enjoyed that this was a book that had a young female Black woman that was excelling in a STEM field. Like, that was great. How often do we get to see that? And I'm so appreciative that this book exists for the girls out there that want to see themselves in a book, and especially like girls that excel in those STEM fields, to see themselves. So I really appreciate all that, and that's why I wanted to give it 4 stars. But in terms of my personal enjoyment, I just didn't enjoy the story. And I think a lot of that is because I don't play video games, and there were so many scenes in the book where we were in the game and I just couldn't follow those scenes. Like, I don't know anything about virtual reality or how those games work. And so there would be like these long scenes when they're having battles and stuff in the game. And it was the same thing for me, like when I read a book that has like space battles where spaceships are like attacking each other, I like zone out during those scenes. It's the same thing. I like would totally zone out. I would turn off the audiobook and go do something else, and then I would be like not feeling invested to come back and turn it back on. And so like I kind of wanted to like just take out all the scenes in the video game, but that would kind of defeat the purpose of the book for people that do like video games. So this is one of those 3 stars that I would highly still recommend. Like if you were somebody that would be fine with video games in a book, like actually having scenes from the game and all that stuff and battles and things like that, if you would enjoy that, then I think you would really like this book, because I think the discussions that are brought up in the book are very valid and great discussions, and I enjoyed all those parts. Anytime we were out of the game, I would enjoy it, but I still highly recommend the book if you are somebody that would enjoy a book about video games. Like if you liked Warcross, which I haven't read because I kind of purposely didn't read it because it's about video games, but I knew I wanted to read this one because of the racial discussions. So if you liked Warcross, then you probably would like this book, and I think you would give it a lot higher rating than I did. Okay, so enough with 3-star reviews. I feel so bad there were so many 3-star reviews in this, but I can't help that August just had so many 3-star books for me. But now let's get into the books I really enjoyed. So I have 2 4-star reads and 1 5-star reads that I want to talk about. Obviously, I had a couple more 5-star reads in the month, but I talked about them in that new release video. So the first 4-star book I wanted to talk about is Rainbow Valley by L.M. Montgomery. I own all the first 6 books in the Anne series, Anne of Green Gables series, but then my box set does not have books 7 and 8. So I ended up listening to this on audiobook. And this one is basically not really about Anne. It is about her children and the children who are like the kids of the pastor, and those 2 sets of kids spending time together. Rainbow Valley is just the area in the woods that they play in, and it's just about the children. So we are following all of Anne's kids and all of these neighbor kids as they go throughout, you know, playing and their friendships and the adventures they have. And I really enjoyed this book. It was so close to being a 5-star, and I'll tell you a little bit why I didn't get that, but I really enjoyed this kind of like return to like childhood. It felt very similar to the first book in the Anne of Green Gables series, in the fact that, like, you know, in that book, Anne was getting up to mischief and doing all these things. It very much felt like that. Like, these kids often get into mischief and have to get out of these situations and help each other out and their friendships, and it was just really sweet. The whole time I was reading this book, I'm like, oh, I could see myself reading this with my kids and really enjoying it. And then there was some really bad racial stuff that got like dropped, and that shocked me because I just wasn't expecting it. Like, I felt like up until this point in the series, there hadn't been, even though these were written a long time ago, there hadn't really been inappropriate language and stuff like that. And so I thought, oh, these are things that I could share with my kids. But in this one, I'm listening to the audiobook, and then all of a sudden, like, the N-word is dropped, and I'm like, where did that come from? And it just came out of nowhere, and I just wasn't expecting it. And I'm glad that I wasn't listening to this with my kids, because about halfway through, I was thinking, oh, I could just have this on in the car or with my kids around, because it's totally about children playing. And then that happened, and then a couple times more, it didn't necessarily say the N-word, but it said racial slurs and bad things, and so I was like, So, I don't know, this leads to, that's why I didn't give it 5 stars, and I feel bad because I know it's a sign of the times, but it brought down a star for me because I don't feel like I could share this book with my kids, even though it is definitely written for a child audience. And then the next one that I enjoyed was Esperanza Rising by Munoz. And this was the one book that I read during middle grade magic that I actually really enjoyed. And I'm excited that I finally got to this. I've been meaning to read this book for a long time. Everybody talks about how great it is on BookTube. Like, all my friends that read middle grade really love this one. And I can see why people love it. I think it was a really nice story. And this is about Esperanza, and it takes place, I don't know what I can't remember when it takes place, but it was a while ago, and Esperanza was living in Mexico on a ranch, and her father was really well off, and you know, they had servants and everything like that, and then her family ends up having to move to California and lose the ranch, lose all their money, and when they're in California, they become farm workers. And so they're living in a camp with other farm workers. They are having to live with, you know, multiple people in one home. You know, they obviously don't have servants anymore and all that stuff. So it's a very different life than what Esperanza was living back in Mexico. And so she's having to just learn this new way of life and seeing how to get enjoyment out of life in a totally different circumstance than what she lived in her young childhood. But it also just is filled with a lot of hope of like how to start life over again and how to see hope for the future and for your family and all that, and just like family relationships, like how when you don't really have much, your family becomes the main source of joy in your life, and you have to just really focus on that instead of like money and possessions and all that stuff. And so I think there's a lot of really good conversations. I like how even though this has some really harder topics, this is perfectly appropriate to share with children. So like I would recommend it for people with kids to read this when my kids get a little bit older, and we can discuss more about what conditions were for farm workers at this time. I guess it's during the Great Depression, now that I see. So that's when this takes place. And so we could discuss those type of things. I would love to read this with my kids in a few years. And finally, let's talk about my 5-star read, which was A Literary Education, Adapting Charlotte Mason for Modern Secular Homeschooling by Emily Cook. And obviously you could tell this is a nonfiction about homeschooling. And since I've decided to homeschool my kids, I wanted to have some more resources. I was looking into a lot of things, and Emily Cook is the person who developed the Build Your Library curriculum, which is just a homeschool curriculum it's a secular curriculum, because I guess I have learned that a lot of homeschool curriculums are Christian-based, and even though we are a Christian family and we are, you know, doing Bible readings and stuff like that with our daughter and like teaching her things like that, we are definitely on the liberal side of the Christian spectrum. And so a lot of these homeschool curriculums that I was looking up were just too conservative in like what they were teaching. And so I wanted a secular homeschool. And so I ended up going with Build Your Library. And I was just curious because she wrote a book. So I wanted to read her book. And I'm so glad I did, because I obviously tabbed it a lot. I was just like loving this book and all of the information I got from it. If you were somebody that's already been homeschooling, you might not get as much out of this, because I think it's definitely for people that are just entering into the process. And Charlotte Mason, I didn't know about her until I started looking into homeschool, but I guess she is pretty big in the homeschool world. She lived more than 100 years ago, but like she kind of created a style of schooling that a lot of homeschoolers go by, which is basically making your curriculum literature-based. So if you're teaching any subject, you're doing it through books and not textbooks. In other words, like literature books, storybooks, and not a dry textbook. And I really appreciate that, because that's what we're doing with my daughter. And as a kindergartner, she's loving it. So we're reading a lot and then pulling any new information, like teaching things out of those books, and we're just having a great time as a family reading together. So yeah, I got so much out of this, and even next year we probably won't be homeschool anymore. Like we're mostly homeschooling because of COVID, and if next year things are more normal or whatever, or we have a vaccine, then we probably will be sending her to public school. But I feel like I will still be using a lot of the principles in this, because I still want us to like read together as a family. And so much of what she talks about in this, I think, will shape how we do family time in the future, how we will like read things together. Like one of the things that I learned from this that I'm so like thankful for is the fact that like stories can be shared with your kids that aren't necessarily just stories for that age group. That like kids are going to absorb things from a book that might not be completely directed towards their age level, and that you can read things as a family and be of different ages and all enjoy the same book. And that we're just really excited like my husband and I that we're gonna do this, like as our kids get older, instead of just having like, you know, time in front of the TV, that we will have like story time where we read our favorite chapter books to our kids, and there'll be stuff that we still enjoy. They don't have to be like kiddie books. They can be good stories. And also, you know me, I enjoy reading children's books if they are written well and have good stories. And I think if a book is well written, it can be appreciated by all people of all ages. And so I'm just really excited to incorporate some of these things into my homeschooling this year, but then also in the way we have family time for the rest of my kids' childhood. So I would highly recommend this if you're just starting out homeschooling, like if you found yourself like me, like suddenly being a homeschooler without having planned that before. I would recommend this because it's really short. Loved this book and will definitely return to it over and over again, I think so. I think that was a great purchase and a great read. So that's it. I'm glad we ended on a high note, because I just feel like this last month there were so many 3-star reads and just so many books that were just average for me, and it just made me sad. It makes me sad when I read a bunch of 3 stars in a row. I just want to get to like a really good book. And when I picked this one up, I had been reading several 3 stars in a row. And so I was like, finally like, oh, I could just zoom through this book and highlight and be excited and talk to my husband about it. And that's what I love about reading, that like, if you get a book that really resonates with you, you just get so excited and want to share it with everybody. And so, yes, I want to share this book with you. I want to share this book with everyone. Loved it. Love the things I get from it. So if you want to talk about any of these books, I'd love to hear from you down below, and I will talk to you next time. Hopefully September we'll have some more 4- and 5-star reads. We're going to hope for that. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.